I'm Isidro Camacho.
And I'm Sydney Lundquist.
And this is A New Hope, Measuring Poverty Through Social Exclusion.
We believe that the current measures of poverty, including the OPM and SPM, are inadequate, and we want to suggest a new way of assessing poverty that is centered around the idea of social exclusion and perceptions of human dignity at a localized level.
Right now, there are three major ways of measuring poverty. The first is the Official Poverty Measure, or the OPM, a national standard set by the Census Bureau. A simple threshold line is established each year by using national food prices. A person is deemed impoverished when they fall below this line. Because it focuses solely on income, the OPM is simplistic. It fails to take into account other factors that affect a person's poverty status. It also fails to adapt to economic trends. Author John Iceland says, while thresholds were originally constructed based on the cost of the food budget, and then multiplied by 3, more recent data indicate that food comprises closer to 1/6 of the family's expenses.
The Supplemental Poverty Measure, or the SPM, is another method in use today. It's slightly more sophisticated than the OPM because it adjusts income for family composition and geographical factors. In addition to family income, it includes income from government policies such as in-kind benefits and near-cash benefits, and it excludes necessary expenses such as taxes, childcare expenses, work expenses, and out-of-pocket medical expenses. This gives us a much more detailed, realistic view of money flowing in and out of a household. Due to its inclusion of welfare, however, the SPM is a more useful tool for gauging the effectiveness of poverty-alleviating programs than for measuring poverty.
The third way of defining poverty is by breaking it down into questions of capability. This method is slightly more philosophical, but it views poverty as an emotional issue rather than a statistical one. Capabilities represent a human's capacity to do valuable acts or reach valuable states of being, according to economist and philosopher Amartya Sen. The choice to fulfill capabilities is a necessity in leading a life above impoverishment. Sen used the term basic capabilities to describe eating, sleeping, and talking, all essential activities which should be present in a human's life.
Martha Nussbaum builds upon the capability approach by clarifying that the ability to choose is more important to human dignity than the fulfillment of certain necessities. So honoring a person's lifestyle is the main objective. She believes that political order must secure a threshold level of 10 central capabilities to all citizens. And these capabilities are life, bodily health, bodily integrity, senses, imagination and thought, emotions, practical reason, affiliation, other species, play, and control over one's environment.
Nussbaum emphasizes the distinction between internal and combined capabilities. An internal capability is something a person has cultivated within herself through practice and repetition. If an individual knows how to cook and has an extensive knowledge of fruits and vegetables, she is fulfilling her internal capability of making a nutritious meal.
Internal capabilities work in tandem with combined capabilities, which take into account how environmental factors can affect an individual's ability to achieve her own internal capabilities. Going back to our previous example, a woman may have the internal capability to make a nutritious meal, but if she can't afford gas or if her local store is too far away, outside factors inhibit her ability to make this meal. Thus, she does not have the combined capability to do so. Combined capabilities in terms of poverty can be used to understand limitations to resources.
Capabilities are a great way of showing how multiple factors outside of income, family composition, and geography can determine a person's poverty level. The capability approach to poverty may be harder to understand, but it successfully sheds light on the importance of human dignity in poverty classification.
Building off of this importance of individual human dignity, we believe that poverty levels should be culturally and societally measured. We define poverty as the lack of the ability for a person to participate in society at a standard level. Thus, poverty is a certain level of social exclusion from the things and functions that the particular society values. This incorporates personal issues such as health, fitness, self-confidence, and education, which all play integral roles in preserving human dignity. Not having the capabilities to participate in regular community activities can feel demoralizing and may lead a human being to feel less, human. Since we feel that tackling poverty should revolve around the care of individual human beings and their preservation of dignity and happiness, Poverty should, in turn, be measured by what most impacts this dignity: social exclusion.
Taking into account these three different measures, the OPM, the SPM, and the capabilities approach, we have created our own way of assessing poverty. Our measure is relative in nature. It uses community standards as a way to judge how an individual might perceive his own self-dignity given his income, capabilities, and access to resources. Because poverty differs on a local level, static national measurements are futile. We need to narrow our understanding of poverty to a community level, providing local offices with standard guidelines. They in turn can use these in a fashion that reflects their community's history, culture, and values.
If our measure was completely relative, however, whole communities that were clearly impoverished could potentially be skipped over if they all met the standard community norm of being impoverished. Therefore, we want to use income as a starting point to ensure there is a national threshold to human dignity. This base number for income would take into account family composition, geographical factors, and standard of living, much like how it is generated in the SPM.
Moving away from numbers, we would next apply a more localized way of calculating access to resources. We would look at how an individual's income affects her ability to fulfill certain capabilities, using a list similar to Nussbaum's. We would then measure how this person might feel given her local social norms. This measurement would be carried out through a system where citizens answer simple yes or no questions. Examples would be, do you feel you have the education to participate in a political debate? Yes or no. Do you believe you have adequate personal hygiene? Yes or no. Do you feel comfortable being seen in public? Yes or no. Through the compilation of these surveys, social exclusion thresholds could be set per community. Anyone below the threshold would be considered impoverished since their human dignity is at risk. Pairing these local social exclusion thresholds with base income thresholds would measure poverty on a more localized, realistic scale.
European nations already have relative measures to help understand the interconnected nature of poverty and social exclusion. In the article, Poverty and Social Exclusion in Britain, Ruth Levitas demonstrates how poverty inhibits a person from engaging in social activities due to a lack in money, resources, or time. Indicators of social exclusion like these are linked almost synonymously to poverty, and they helped launch Britain's National Action Plan for Social Inclusion in 2001. If similar standards for assessing social exclusion were adopted by communities in the U.S., they would add a personal component to alleviating poverty.
Poverty becomes easier to understand when it's localized. Sometimes just giving some old clothes to a family or helping out with groceries once in a while can have a huge impact on a person's dignity in the face of poverty. We align with authors Elizabeth Lynn and Susan Wisely's Tradition of Philanthropy, which focuses on alleviating poverty by strengthening relationships and nurturing conversations, rather than just giving money.
There are, of course, some problems with our social exclusion poverty measure. Some may argue that our measurement of poverty is extremely relative and not consistent. This is not a problem in our eyes. Poverty should not be a blanket term or a unified measurement. Humans are individuals, and different cultures will have different ideas about what is valuable. Poverty measures should be taken at societal levels in order to measure social exclusion of individuals based on their society's unique standard of living.
This method also places a larger burden on local governments. We think that by supplying these political figures with guidelines for our social exclusion measure, civic engagement would be easier to mobilize. Poverty would be better clarified within the community itself. There are, however, inevitable limitations to self-reporting. Asking people personal questions may not always produce very accurate data.
Since we are claiming that every one of our human dignity needs must be met, as well as a base income earned in order to not be so-called impoverished, it is likely that more people will fall below our threshold line. But having too many people classified as impoverished is not a problem in and of itself. We do believe that someone not having human dignity through a certain level of social inclusion would be impoverished. The next step would be to take this data and determine how to alleviate poverty in a feasible way.
Poverty often threatens a person's self-dignity by hindering full participation in society. Measuring and tackling poverty should revolve around the protection of a person's dignity, which is often determined by how she meets social norms. We need to revise the current way of measuring poverty through wide-scale income and capability evaluation. We should focus more on localized social inclusion. Analyzing data about a person's health, appearance, education, and self-confidence would allow us to measure poverty on a more individual, personal, and realistic level.